My grandfather saw me as his helpless victim, so I became the last thing he ever saw. I was in 4th grade when my grandfather moved in with us after Grandma died. Dad worked nights at the factory and slept during the day, which meant I spent every afternoon alone with a man who saw me as something to own rather than protect. That's when I learned that monsters don't hide under beds. They sit in recliners watching game shows while planning their next move. Living with him was like walking through a minefield in your own home. He'd watch me with these calculating eyes, always finding excuses to get me alone. "Your dad needs his sleep," he'd say, blocking my bedroom door when I tried to escape to do homework. "Come watch TV with Grandpa." But it was never about TV. He'd pat his lap like I was still 3 years old, not 9. When I'd sit on the couch instead, he'd move closer, always closer, until I could smell his breath. Sometimes he'd accidentally brush against me, then watch my face to see if I'd tell. I never did. Who'd believe a kid over a grieving widower? The dress incident happened on a Tuesday. He'd called the school, pretended I was sick, told them he was taking me to the doctor. Instead, he pulled out this pink dress from when I was 6 and held it up like some kind of prize. The lace was yellowed, the bow crushed. "Put this on for Grandpa," he said, his voice different, darker. "You were so pretty in it." I refused, backing toward my room, but he grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, he was too smart for that, but firm enough to make his point. The things that happened next, even though I fought, even though I said no, they made me feel hollow, like he'd reached inside and scooped out everything that made me me. That night, I lay in bed planning all the ways I could hurt him back, but I was small, and he was big, so I waited. But here's what he didn't know about 4th graders. We're not as helpless as we look. And so, I threw myself into learning everything I could. Girl Scouts taught me CPR, how to recognize heart attacks, stroke symptoms, what to do in emergencies. More importantly, they taught me when not to act. I memorized every symptom, every second that mattered between life and death. Mrs. Peterson showed us the golden hour, how brain death begins after just 4 minutes without oxygen, how after 10 minutes, even if you're revived, you're never really the same. Knowledge became my weapon while I waited. 3 weeks after the dress, it was just another afternoon. Dad was sleeping before his shift, and Grandpa was in his recliner like always. I sat on the couch doing math homework, feeling his eyes on me every few seconds. He'd been extra bold lately, talking about another special day coming up. Then I heard it, this wet, choking sound. He was clutching his stomach, face turning gray. Vomit splashed into the trash can beside his chair, the smell of sour milk and fear filling the room. His hand flew to his chest, fingers clawing at his shirt like he was trying to tear through to his heart. Was all he could manage, eyes wide with panic, looking straight at me. I knew exactly what was happening. Mrs. Peterson had demonstrated the signs just last week at our troop meeting. Chest pain, difficulty breathing, that distinctive gray pallor, the way his left arm had gone limp. Classic heart attack. Textbook, really. I should have jumped up, called 911 and started chest compressions. That's what good girls do. That's what Girl Scouts do. Instead, I set down my pencil and smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one, the same one he used to give me when Dad wasn't looking. I folded my hands in my lap and watched. His eyes got wider, more desperate. The vein in his forehead bulged purple. He tried to reach for the phone on the side table, but I grabbed it away. I could see him trying to scream for my dad, but only those pathetic sounds came out, each one weaker than the last. The power in the room had shifted. He wasn't the monster anymore, just a dying old man begging for help from the one person who had every reason to let him die. I counted in my head as his face went from gray to blue. 3 minutes in, his movements got weaker and more erratic. 4 minutes passed by, the magic number where real damage began. 5. His eyes started rolling back, showing the whites like a broken doll. 7 minutes in, only when he slumped completely unconscious, when his chest barely moved and I was sure it was too late for anything meaningful to be done, did I run to Dad's room. Dad, something's wrong with Grandpa. The rest was textbook emergency response. Dad called 911, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, and rode with the ambulance while I went to the neighbors. He died at the hospital. Massive cardiac arrest, they said. Nothing anyone could have done. At the funeral, I cried right on cue. Everyone said how brave I was, how terrible it must have been to see him like that. If only they knew I'd been practicing those tears in the mirror, that I'd slept better that night than I had in months. But I guess I wasn't a very good Girl Scout after all, because 3 weeks later, I was doing homework again when the doorbell rang. Dad answered it, and I heard voices in the entryway. "We need to speak with your daughter," a woman said, "about the day her grandfather died." My pencil stopped moving as 2 police officers walked into the living room. The female officer's hand rested on her holstered radio as she stepped into the living room, her eyes scanning the space before settling on me. The male officer followed, his gaze lingering on Grandpa's empty recliner still positioned in the corner, the worn fabric holding the shape of a man who'd never sit there again. My stomach dropped. They'd already been in our house. Dad stood behind them, still in his work clothes from being woken up, looking confused and protective at the same time. The female officer smiled at me, but it wasn't a real smile. It was the kind adults use when they're trying to seem friendly while doing something serious. She asked if Dad could stay while they talked to me. Dad immediately tensed up, moving closer to where I sat frozen on the couch. He told them he needed to call our neighbor first, Mrs. Chen, who was a lawyer. The officers exchanged a look but agreed to wait. While Dad made the call, the female officer sat down across across from me, maintaining that fake friendly expression. She mentioned casually that she had a daughter in Girl Scouts too, Troop 847. My blood turned to ice. That was my troop number. They'd already been investigating me, looking into my background, probably talking to people who knew me. Before I could stop myself, before anyone had even asked a question, the words tumbled out of my mouth. I tried to help him. The moment I said it, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Both officers' expressions shifted. The male officer pulled out a notepad and started writing while the female officer leaned forward slightly, her voice still gentle but now with an edge of purpose. Mrs. Chen arrived within 10 minutes, looking professional despite being in weekend clothes. But when Dad explained why she was there, her face fell. She pulled Dad aside and I could hear her explaining that her law license was for corporate contracts. She'd help today, but we needed a criminal lawyer, and she specifically mentioned avoiding Tom Bradley because he was going through a messy divorce. Dad's face went pale as the reality hit him. His daughter was being questioned about his father's death, and they didn't even have proper legal representation. He had to make a choice right there, with everyone watching. Let me answer questions and risk saying something wrong, or invoke our right to silence and look guilty. The male officer unconsciously tapped his pen against his notepad while waiting. The rhythm was eerily familiar. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 pause. It was exactly how Grandpa used to tap his fingers on his chair arm when he was thinking about something. My hands clenched in my lap. Dad chose silence. He politely but firmly told the officers that we wouldn't be answering any questions today. He needed time to find proper legal counsel. The female officer nodded like she'd expected this, saying they understood and would return tomorrow, giving us time to make arrangements. The way she said it made it sound like we were planning a funeral, not preparing a legal defense. They left their cards and walked out, but I watched through the window as their car pulled away slowly, like they were memorizing every detail of our house and street. Within an hour, our quiet Saturday exploded into chaos. Dad's phone rang first. His boss was furious that he'd left his Friday night shift early when the police had first contacted him. The man threatened Dad's job if it happened again, saying he couldn't have unreliable workers on the factory floor. Dad tried to explain, but the boss cut him off, making it clear that whatever was happening with our family better not affect the workplace. Before Dad could even process that threat, the house phone rang. It was my school counselor, her voice dripping with false concern. She'd been reviewing some of my recent creative writing assignments and found them disturbing. She wanted to schedule an immediate meeting about my violent fantasies and my stories. I remembered the story I'd written about a girl who escaped a monster. Suddenly, it seemed less like fiction. Dad's phone buzzed with a text while he was still on the house phone. His face went white as he read it. Aunt Patricia, Grandpa's daughter who lived 3 states away, had somehow already heard about the police visit. Her message was short but loaded with threat. Flying in tomorrow. Someone needs to protect Dad's interests. Dad hung up on the counselor mid-sentence and immediately started making more calls. He needed to find a criminal lawyer, figure out how to handle Patricia, keep his job, and protect me all at once. While he paced the kitchen making calls, I tried to help by looking up lawyers on the computer. That's when I noticed something strange. A car was parked down the street, one I didn't recognize. As our neighbor came out to get his mail, the car's window rolled down slightly. Was someone taking pictures? When Mrs. Chen left our house and 2 more neighbors came by to check on us after seeing the police car, I realized they were documenting everyone who visited us. My phone started buzzing with messages. The group chat for my class was blowing up. Emma, my best friend since 2nd grade, was defending me against kids saying horrible things. But then Emma's messages stopped abruptly. Her mom worked at the hospital where Grandpa died. 10 minutes later, Emma texted me privately that her mom said she couldn't be involved in this mess. Dad finally got through to his brother, asking for lawyer recommendations. I could hear my uncle's voice through the phone, shocked and confused. After Dad explained, there was a long pause before my uncle said he'd make some calls, but his voice had changed, become distant, like he was already pulling away from us. The doorbell rang again. This time it was a reporter from the local news station, asking for a statement about the suspicious death and the police investigation. Dad slammed the door in his face, but the damage was already done. They already had their story. I noticed Grandpa's journal sitting on the coffee table, wrapped in yellow evidence tape. The police must have marked it during their earlier visit, but left it behind. I remembered Grandpa writing in it the morning he died, his hand shaking as he made notes. Now it sat there like a bomb, visible but untouchable. If we broke the seal, we'd be tampering with evidence. But what had he written that last morning? Dad's phone rang again. This time it was Aunt Patricia, and he put it on speaker so he could keep making other calls. Her voice filled the kitchen, sobbing dramatically about how her father might have been murdered. She kept saying things like, "Think about what this accusation does to Mom's memory," and "How could anyone think our family capable of this?" But I heard the calculation under her tears. Patricia had always resented that Grandpa lived with us instead of her, had always complained about the money he spent helping with our bills. Now she was positioning herself as the grieving daughter while painting us as suspects. The afternoon spiraled further out of control. The school called back, this time the principal, saying they'd need to conduct their own investigation into my behavioral issues. The neighbor across across the street suddenly remembered she needed to close her blinds when she saw me looking out the window. My phone kept buzzing with notifications as screenshots of my old social media posts started circulating. Someone had found an Instagram post from 2 years ago where I joked about poisoning annoying relatives after watching a murder mystery show. It was clearly about the TV show, but taken out of context and shared in the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "This is who called George." It looked damning. Dad tried to shield me from most of it, but I could see the weight crushing him. He needed to keep his job to pay for lawyers. He needed to find a lawyer who could handle this. He needed to deal with Patricia's incoming interference. He needed to protect me from a community that was already turning against us. And he needed to do it all while grieving his father and processing the possibility that his daughter had let him die. By evening, the house felt like a fortress under siege. Dad had called in sick for his Saturday night shift, risking his boss's anger. He'd found a criminal lawyer who could see us Monday, but that felt like a lifetime away. Patricia's flight would land Sunday afternoon, and we both knew she'd make everything worse. I helped Dad order pizza for dinner, neither of us having energy to cook. When the delivery driver arrived, he looked at our house with recognition and practically threw the pizza at Dad before hurrying away. Even the pizza guy had heard. That night, Dad tucked me in for the first time in years. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking older than I'd ever seen him. He didn't ask me what happened that day with Grandpa. He didn't accuse or question or demand answers. He just told me he loved me and that we'd get through this together. But as I lay in the dark, I could hear him on the phone with someone. Maybe the lawyer Mrs. Chen had recommended. His voice was low, but I caught fragments. Need to know our options, and Patricia's going to complicate everything, and I can't lose my job right now. The journal sat downstairs like a ticking time bomb. The police would be back tomorrow. Patricia would arrive with her own agenda. The whole town was already choosing sides, and somewhere in all of this, the truth about what Grandpa did to me was buried, a secret that would either save me or destroy what was left of our family. I pulled my Girl Scout handbook from my nightstand, flipping to the section on emergency preparedness. Mrs. Peterson had taught us to always have a plan, to think 3 steps ahead, but she'd been preparing us for natural disasters and accidents, not for when the emergency was a choice you made and the disaster was the aftermath of finally fighting back. Tomorrow, everything would get worse. But tonight, for the first time since Grandpa moved in, I fell asleep without checking that my door was locked, without fearing footsteps in the hallway, without the weight of his presence in our home. Even with police investigations and family betrayals and community judgment closing in, I slept better than I had in months. The monster was gone. Now I just had to survive what came next. The morning brought Aunt Patricia's pediatrician boyfriend to our door. Dr. Patel stood there holding flowers, explaining Patricia had asked him to check on us before her arrival. His genuine concern made my skin crawl as I watched him scan our living room, taking mental notes. Dad offered coffee while I noticed how Dr. Patel's eyes lingered on family photos, on Grandpa's journal still sealed with evidence tape, on the stack of legal documents Dad had been reviewing. Patricia called during his visit, her voice filling the kitchen as she spoke about family taking care of family, Grandpa's favorite saying. Dr. Patel nodded along, clearly smitten, while Dad's jaw tightened. I watched this man who'd given me vaccines and lollipops transform into Patricia's unwitting spy, gathering information she'd use against us. Dad confronted Patricia about her threatening text from Tuesday morning, but she gasped in shock, claiming Dad had called her begging for money. The certainty in her voice made my stomach drop. She wasn't lying. She believed her version completely. Dad hung up, hands shaking, as we both realized Patricia had already started rewriting history. The polygraph results came back that afternoon. Both Dad and Patricia had passed, each believing their contradictory versions of events. The detective delivering the results watched our faces carefully as he explained how memory could be subjective, how stress could alter perception. His words felt like a trap closing around us. Emma's mom forwarded an old text to the police, one where I'd written, "I wish he would just die already," 2 years ago. I remembered that night clearly, stuck on a video game boss for hours, venting to my best friend, but context didn't matter anymore. My own words became evidence in Patricia's custody filing. Sunday dinner at my uncle's house turned into an ambush. My 4-year-old cousin climbed into my lap, then suddenly pulled away, asking why Aunt Patty said I hurt Grandpa on purpose. The room went silent. My uncle's wife quickly ushered the children outside, but the damage was done. Even the babies were being turned against me. Patricia's next move was revealing the Ring doorbell she'd installed as a Christmas gift. The footage from that day showed me happy, laughing with Grandpa, playing board games, just weeks before his death. The investigator asked why I seemed so comfortable with my alleged abuser. I couldn't explain how abuse worked, how some days were normal, how monsters weren't monsters every moment. Family court treated Dad's concerns about Patricia's financial motives as parental alienation. The judge warned him about poisoning my relationship with my loving aunt. Dad's lawyer frantically took notes while Patricia's attorney smiled. Everything we said to protect ourselves was being twisted into evidence against us. I remembered Grandpa's Amazon password. He'd made me memorize it for ordering his medications. Racing against time, I logged in before Patricia could change it. The browser history made me freeze. Searches about child abuse symptoms, all from the day before he died. But was he researching to help me or to hide better? The ambiguity made me want to scream. Patricia's Instagram showed her wearing Grandma's emerald necklace at a charity fundraiser. The comments revealed Grandpa had given her the jewelry last month, along with other family heirlooms. While we struggled to pay for lawyers, she was flaunting wealth she'd extracted from him before his death. Dr. Morse, the court-appointed therapist, took notes as I tried to explain the abuse without breaking down. But when I mentioned wanting Grandpa gone, she stopped writing and looked up sharply. My confession about the abuse became secondary to my admission of wanting him dead. Context evaporated in the face of legal documentation. The custody exchange was scheduled at the police station. Patricia arrived early, positioning herself where security cameras would catch everything. When I tried to record her threats on my phone, she spotted it immediately, her voice becoming honey-sweet as she expressed concern for my mental state. The security footage would show her being supportive while I looked paranoid and aggressive. School pickup became a chess match. Dad's court-mandated parenting class across town meant Patricia could collect me. I sat in the office waiting, watching the clock, knowing Dad was racing through traffic but wouldn't make it. Patricia arrived with flowers and my favorite candy, performing concern for the office staff. Mrs. Peterson initially agreed to testify about teaching CPR at Girl Scouts. Her testimony could explain how I knew to recognize the symptoms, but an anonymous complaint to the school board threatened her teaching license, claiming she was supporting a child killer. She had 3 kids to feed. She withdrew her support with tears in her eyes. Patricia had moved into Grandpa's room at her house, surrounding herself with his things. His cologne still clung to the pillowcases. She wore Grandma's nightgown while using their Netflix account. When I stayed over for court-ordered visitation, she'd cry holding his photos, asking why I took him from her. The ultimatum came during a mediation session. Patricia would drop the custody fight if I made a public statement calling Grandpa's death a tragic accident. She'd even written it for me, each word carefully chosen to absolve everyone while subtly admitting guilt. Dad refused before I could even consider it. His refusal was immediately reframed by Patricia's lawyer. Dad was forcing me to maintain delusions rather than accept reality and heal. The mediator took notes about his concerning rigidity and failure to prioritize the child's psychological needs. Every protective instinct Dad showed became evidence of unfitness. Security footage destroyed my memory of that day. I'd been certain Grandpa entered through the garage, but video showed him using the front door. If I was wrong about something so basic, what else had I misremembered? Patricia's lawyer played the footage repeatedly during depositions, each viewing eroding my credibility. Patricia mentioned Grandpa's memory book during an argument, his tablet where he recorded video diaries. Dad's face went white as he realized what she meant. We'd forgotten about his daily recordings, his habit of documenting everything. Whatever was on that tablet would either save or damn us. The videos were worse than our darkest fears. Grandpa sat in his recliner, tears streaming down his face, documenting my disturbing behavior. He described my coldness, my rejection of his affection, his fears about my mental state. He begged Patricia for help in message after message. The abuse I'd suffered was invisible while my trauma responses were cataloged as evidence of evil. Dad's brother faced an impossible choice. Patricia controlled visitation with his kids through complicated babysitting arrangements. Supporting Dad meant losing access to his children. I watched my uncle's face crumble as he chose his kids, agreeing to testify that Dad was overwhelmed as a single parent. Another ally gone. I started engineering encounters with Patricia's friends, planting seeds of doubt about her sudden wealth. At the coffee shop, I'd mention how she used to mock doctors as boring. At the grocery store, I'd wonder aloud about Grandpa's missing watch. Each interaction was calculated, using their gossip network against her. Dr. Patel and I collided at the coffee shop, a meeting I'd orchestrated by learning his routine. I mentioned Patricia's old complaints about dating boring professionals, watching his face change as he processed this information. He stirred his coffee slower, asked careful questions. I could see his faith in her cracking. Dad's old iPad still had Grandpa's iCloud logged in from when he'd used it for recipes. Before Patricia realized the security gap, I screenshot everything. Texts about inheritance planning, messages about moving money, complaints about Dad's family, evidence of financial manipulation dating back years. Dolores emerged from Grandpa's past like a ghost. His ex-girlfriend from the senior center had her own story about Patricia's promises of money for silence. She spoke about Grandpa's preferences, his history, things Patricia knew but ignored for decades. Dolores wanted her cut of whatever Patricia had gotten. Fighting Patricia and Dolores simultaneously meant missing crucial therapy appointments. Dr. Morse marked me as non-compliant with treatment. Patricia's chosen therapist had an opening that afternoon, but accepting meant giving her another weapon. Every choice led deeper into her trap. Dad's credit cards maxed out from legal fees while Patricia used Grandpa's Costco card for her grief support group catering. She hosted elaborate gatherings in Grandpa's house, playing the grieving daughter while we ate ramen in our increasingly empty home. The inequality was suffocating. The confrontation at Grandpa's favorite diner traumatized everyone present. The elderly waitress who'd served him pie every Thursday just wanted to remember George kindly. Instead, she witnessed Patricia and Dad screaming about money while I sat silent. The supposed killer everyone whispered about. She hasn't returned to work since. Dad lost his factory job the day before the custody hearing hearing. Excessive absences affecting team safety, they said. His replacement was Patricia's friend's husband, hired within hours of Dad's termination. Without income, our custody case crumbled. Unemployment meant instability, exactly what Patricia needed to prove. We moved into an extended stay motel, while Patricia hosted book club in Grandpa's house. She told her guests about the tragedy that brought her home, how she was healing through community. Through the thin motel walls, I heard Dad calling loan companies, begging for extensions, selling everything we could spare. Grandma's sister Helen arrived unannounced at the motel. She stood in our doorway, tears streaming, begging me to let Grandpa rest in peace. We were torturing the whole family, she said. Her pain was real, but it was also another weapon Patricia had deployed. Even the elderly were being mobilized against us. My investigation into Patricia's finances caused collateral damage. A hospital clerk who'd tried to help got suspended for improperly accessing records. Her daughter asked why Mommy couldn't buy groceries anymore. I'd destroyed an innocent family while trying to save my own. The clerk's husband filed for separation within a week, claiming his wife's involvement with our murderer family endangered their children. Patricia's lawyer added it to evidence of our destructive influence. Every person who tried to help us paid a price that became evidence against us. I kept pushing despite the destruction because stopping meant Patricia won. It meant Grandpa's abuse stayed secret forever. It meant Dad lost everything for nothing. So I continued digging, manipulating, scheming, becoming the cold calculator Grandpa had described in his videos. Dad asked the question during our lowest moment, sitting on the motel bed surrounded by legal papers. What if Patricia was right? What if I'd panicked and remembered wrong? The doubt in his voice shattered something inside me. I couldn't answer immediately because I'd started wondering the same thing. At the emergency hearing, I confessed to every lie I'd ever told. Skipping homework, taking money from Dad's wallet, sneaking snacks, exaggerating illness to miss school. I laid out my flaws, hoping honesty about small sins would make them believe the big truth. Instead, it established a pattern of deception. Grandpa's tablet videos included Christmas footage from weeks before his death. I looked happy, genuinely delighted with presents, hugging him naturally. Patricia's lawyer played it repeatedly. Why didn't I fight then? Why did I seem so comfortable? The questions I couldn't answer multiplied. Patricia's emergency motion advanced our trial date by 3 months. My lawyer was in Bermuda, unreachable. Her lawyer cited my deteriorating mental state, the danger of delay. The judge agreed. We had 2 weeks to prepare for a trial that would determine everything. Patricia's rage had deep roots. Her biological children had abandoned Grandpa while she visited weekly for 20 years. She'd cleaned his house, managed his medications, listened to his stories. In her mind, she'd earned every penny through decades of caregiving. We were ungrateful thieves trying to steal her compensation. She knew about his problems. The videos made that clear. But she'd weighed decades of caregiving against his sins and decided she deserved payment. Her moral calculus was horrifying but comprehensible. She'd cleaned up his messes, literal and figurative, for 20 years. To win, I had to reveal everything publicly. The dress, the touching, the afternoon horrors I'd never fully told anyone. Dad would hear every detail in open court. I watched his face crumble as I testified, saw him finally understand why his father was a monster. The truth destroyed him almost as much as the lies. The strategic narrator replaced the scared child completely. I learned Patricia's daughter Sophie had a crush on my friend. I exploited it, arranging study sessions where Sophie revealed her mother's financial desperation. Using a 16-year-old's feelings as weapons made me sick, but I did it anyway. Our custody victory felt hollow when I saw Patricia at Grandpa's grave. She knelt in the mud, holding flowers she'd brought weekly for decades, sobbing genuinely. We were both crying over the same man for different reasons. Her for the father she'd lost, me for the grandfather I'd never had. Patricia's counterclaim gained traction. Elder abuse by neglect, she argued. Dad's work schedule left Grandpa unsupervised. My violent fantasies and creative writing showed dangerous tendencies. The same evidence that proved abuse became proof of neglect. Every angle had been calculated. Everything depended on Dolores testifying about Grandpa's interests and Patricia's knowledge. But Dolores wanted money, not justice. She'd say whatever helped her chances of getting paid. Truth became negotiable. Justice a luxury we couldn't afford. Sophie begged me to stop hurting her mother during visitation. She wore a bracelet I'd made her in 2nd grade, a reminder of when our families were whole. Patricia had already won, Sophie said. Why did I need to destroy her? I couldn't explain that some victories were Pyrrhic. Dad's co-workers split into factions. Some believed abuse justified everything. Others thought murder was never acceptable. The factory floor became a battlefield of moral philosophy, while Dad's absence meant everyone chose sides without his input. His job was gone, but the judgment remained. The judge's ruling split every difference. Insufficient evidence for criminal charges, but enough for a restraining order. Protection without justice, safety without vindication. Patricia couldn't come near us, but faced no real consequences. The legal system had spoken in riddles. I called in Grandpa's marker at the VA hospital. He'd volunteered there for years, building relationships I now exploited. His friends provided partial records showing his anxiety about family dynamics, but public testimony was too far. They'd help quietly, but wouldn't risk their reputations. The records revealed Grandpa's final months differently than we'd imagined. He knew I was pulling away, stayed trying to fix things before it was too late. His diary entry before he died spoke of making amends. He'd been documenting for protection suspicion too, just like I had. We'd both been keeping evidence against each other. The records showed Grandpa's handwriting getting shakier in his final weeks. Each entry documented his growing fear, not of me, but of Patricia discovering his secrets. His final diary entry made my hands tremble as I read it in the courthouse bathroom. He'd written about staying to make amends, but the next line revealed the truth. Patricia had threatened to expose everything if he changed his will back to favor Dad. Dolores arrived at court wearing the same perfume Grandma used to wear, a calculated move that made Patricia visibly flinch. She handed over a voicemail Patricia had left her months ago, hammered and ranting about dealing with George's sick habits for 20 years. The recording captured Patricia admitting she knew exactly what Grandpa was, but stayed silent for the inheritance. The courtroom filled with familiar faces as both sides prepared for final arguments. Girl Scout leaders sat behind Patricia, their fundraising connections too valuable to risk. Teachers and neighbors divided themselves by invisible lines, Patricia's side noticeably emptier as evidence mounted. I watched Sophie slip into the back row, that bracelet I'd made her still on her wrist. Patricia's physical transformation shocked everyone. Her designer clothes had been replaced with Grandma's old court dress, the same one from their wedding photo. She'd lost weight, her hair thinning from stress. Across the aisle, I caught my reflection in the courtroom glass. My own hair had started falling out in clumps, leaving bald patches Dad tried to hide with careful styling. Dr. Patel took the stand looking conflicted. Under oath, he revealed Patricia had pursued him specifically after learning he was my pediatrician. She'd manipulated him for access to my medical records, but he also testified that her grief for Grandpa was genuine. His voice cracked as he admitted he couldn't lie about what he'd witnessed. Patricia sobbing over photo albums, visiting Grandpa's grave daily, genuinely devastated by his loss. The handwriting expert's testimony changed everything. Patricia's power of attorney document contained forged sections, additions made after Grandpa's death that granted her executor status. The forensic analysis showed she'd practiced his signature hundreds of times on scratch paper found in her trash. The judge's expression hardened as the expert explained how desperation drove people to alter documents they believed they deserved. Patricia's breakdown came during cross-examination. She stood up, shaking, and the words poured out. 20 years of driving Grandpa to appointments while her siblings ignored him. 20 years of cleaning his house, managing his medications, listening to the same war stories. She'd known about his preferences, but convinced herself that her caregiving outweighed his sins. In her mind, she was saving him from an ungrateful family who didn't appreciate his complexities. The judge ordered a recess as Patricia collapsed. Sophie rushed forward, but security held her back. I watched my cousin struggle against the guards, screaming for her mother, and felt the weight of every choice I'd made. The strategic narrator who'd manipulated a teenager's crush crumbled as Sophie's tears fell. Evidence of financial crimes mounted through the afternoon. Bank records showed Patricia had been siphoning money for years, small amounts that added up to thousands. She'd justified each withdrawal as payment for caregiving, keeping meticulous records of every hour spent with Grandpa. Her notebook documented 20 years of unpaid labor, calculated at minimum wage plus overtime. The prosecutor presented Grandpa's final bank statements. 3 days before his death, he'd tried to close accounts Patricia had access to. The bank manager testified that Grandpa seemed frightened, constantly checking over his shoulder. He'd whispered about needing to protect his real family, but left without completing the paperwork when Patricia called his cell phone. My testimony came last. I sat in that chair, facing the room full of people who'd watched me grow up, and told them everything. The dress, the touching, the calculated decision to let him die. I watched Dad's knuckles turn white as he gripped the bench. I saw Mrs. Peterson close her eyes when I described using her CPR training to recognize the heart attack. I felt the room's judgment settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. The judge's deliberation took 3 hours. Patricia faced charges for fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The evidence proved she'd manipulated Grandpa's final days, but it also revealed the complex web of caregiving, obligation, and moral compromise that families create. She received 5 years probation, weekend jail for 6 months, and mandatory restitution. Dad retained full custody without restrictions. The judge acknowledged the impossible situation our family had faced, noting that while my actions raised ethical concerns, no evidence supported criminal charges. The restraining order between households would remain permanent. Patricia could have supervised visitation with her own children, but no contact with me. Community reactions split immediately. The Girl Scout troop expelled me through a formal vote, Mrs. Peterson abstaining but not defending. Some neighbors started crossing the street when they saw us coming. Others left casseroles on our doorstep with anonymous notes of support. The town would never see our family the same way. Dad found work at a different factory through a friend who believed in second chances. The night shift paid less but offered flexibility for my therapy appointments. We moved into a small apartment near the industrial district, far from Grandpa's house and the memories it held. The walls were thin and the heat unreliable, but it was ours. Sophie sent a letter through her school counselor. She couldn't forgive me for destroying her mother, but she understood why I'd done it. She was living with her older sister now, trying to finish high school while her mom served weekend sentences. The bracelet I'd made her was enclosed in the envelope, returned without comment. Financial restitution began immediately. Patricia's wages were garnished, her assets liquidated. Dad received checks that barely covered our legal debt, each payment a reminder of how money had poisoned every relationship. Grandpa's house sold at auction, the proceeds divided among creditors and lawyers. years. School became unbearable. Teachers who'd once praised my writing now watched me suspiciously. Classmates whispered about the girl who called her grandfather, adding details that grew more horrific with each telling. Emma tried to maintain our friendship privately but couldn't risk public association. I understood. Her mother's job mattered more than our history. The clerk whose life I'd ruined sent a message through her lawyer. She'd found new work but wanted me to know the cost of my investigation. Her daughter had needed therapy after the divorce. Her ex-husband had won primary custody. She hoped I understood that justice for one person could mean destruction for others. Patricia served her first weekend in county jail while I started sophomore year at a new school 40 minutes away. Dad drove me each morning before his shift, both of us silent in the pre-dawn darkness. My new classmates didn't know my history, but I flinched whenever elderly male teachers stood too close, earning a reputation as standoffish and strange. Therapy appointments revealed layers of trauma I'd buried under strategic planning. Dr. Morse had transferred my case to someone who specialized in complex grief, the mourning that comes when your abuser dies and takes the possibility of confrontation with them. I learned that letting Grandpa die hadn't freed me. It had frozen me in that moment of choice forever. Patricia's other children cut contact completely. Her son moved across the country, changing his phone number. Her older daughter filed her own restraining order, claiming emotional abuse throughout childhood. The family Patricia had fought to preserve disintegrated under the weight of revealed truths. Winter arrived with news that Dolores had died peacefully in her sleep. She'd left her evidence collection to the district attorney with instructions to preserve it in case Patricia violated probation. Even in death, she maintained her leverage, understanding that some battles never truly end. Dad started dating a woman from his grief support group, someone who understood that love could coexist with devastating secrets. She had her own story of family trauma and accepted ours without judgment. Watching them together, I saw possibility for healing I hadn't believed existed. The anniversary of Grandpa's death passed quietly. Patricia left flowers at his grave at dawn. We visited at dusk. The groundskeeper told us this schedule had developed naturally, both sides avoiding confrontation through careful timing. The stone read, "Beloved father and grandfather," words that meant different things to different mourners. 2 years later, I stood at a podium in a small conference room, speaking to child advocates about recognizing abuse and the complex aftermath of seeking justice. I didn't tell them whether I regretted letting Grandpa die, only that I regretted it had come to that. The audience of 20 social workers and counselors took notes as I explained how monsters could be victims too, how victims could make monstrous choices, how justice and healing rarely looked like what movies promised. Patricia served her weekend sentences faithfully, working at a nursing home during the week where her dedication to elderly care earned praise from supervisors who didn't know her history. Sophie graduated high school and started community college, occasionally sending holiday cards with no return address. Dad found happiness with his new partner, building a life that acknowledged the past without being consumed by it. I never returned to Girl Scouts. Mrs. Peterson retired early, and the troop disbanded within a year. Sometimes I'd see former troop members around town when visiting Dad, their eyes sliding past me like I was invisible. The skills they'd taught me had saved my life and destroyed others. Knowledge was a weapon that cut both ways.